Okay. Erev Tov, everyone. Ve'ele Shmot B'nai Yisrael Aboim Mitzrayim. The Torah then lists for us the names of the 12 tribes. Yosef Hoya b'Mitzrayim, Ephraim and Menashe, so why did the Torah do that? Why is that the entrance to the story of the exile in Egypt? The story can begin of Bnei Yisrael, Poru va'yishutzu va'yirbu mimod ma'od. Shivim Nefesh came down, they came down very few in number, and then a remarkable population explosion in a relatively short period of time, Vatimole Oretz Hosam. In the beginning of the 19th century, there only were about 2.5 million Jews in Europe. By the beginning of the 20th century, by the Second World War, or even by the First World War, there were close to 10 million Jews, 11 million Jews in Europe. An enormous population explosion. And then we know what happened. But there have been periods in Jewish history where the Jewish population has been rather small. And then it became very large. For instance, in the time of Rashi, there were maybe only 5,000 Ashkenazim in the world. And the Ashkenazim grew to be the majority of the Jewish people. Because events happened. The Sephardim, the Golas Sfarad took a tremendous toll. There were plagues, wars, all the good things. I mean, we are witness to Corona. The Lord should protect us and it should end. But you have to imagine that humankind has lived in this fashion almost from its onset. And so in the Middle Ages, there was the bubonic plague that killed 1/3 of the population of Europe. Entire cities became wastelands. And then there were the usual things, smallpox, and because of water that wasn't clean, cholera epidemics. This recorded for us in all of the tshuvas of the Gaonim throughout all of the centuries. They always contended with plagues. And that would give us a window into why the plagues against Egypt did not have, so to speak, the desired effect, because the world was accustomed to live with plagues. The Meforshim point out that there always were problems with frogs and with shchin and with borod. The Makas Bechoros was the ultimate plague. But the plagues themselves, so to speak, are not exceptional. They're part of the human story. So the Jewish population exploded in Egypt. So then why does it begin Velish Mos B'nai Yisrael? So this Mepharshim say that this is an allusion to what the Medrash teaches us, that the Jewish people of Mitzrayim were a mixed breed. By that I mean many of them assimilated, worshipped Egyptian gods. They didn't believe in Moshe. They didn't want to go out of Mitzrayim. And that is what they will say later. Their mindset will be, Tolanu, it was better for us to die in Egypt than to go in the desert and die in the desert from thirst and from hunger. Yet Chazal say Midrashim, Chazal say that the Jewish people had certain redeeming factors in Jewish society in Egypt. One of them was, the Gemara lists three things. One is Shaloshinu es Lashonam. They continued to speak Hebrew. It doesn't mean that they didn't know Egyptian or they didn't speak Egyptian, but that was not their language. Like amongst the Ashkenazim, Yiddish was the language. So they didn't speak Polish, even though they knew Polish. They didn't speak Lithuanian. We don't have any record of any Rav ever delivering a drasha in Lithuanian, even though they knew Lithuanian, because they had to deal with the society in which they lived. So in Mitzrayim, one of the examples of how to behave in Golus was Shaloshinu es Lashona, not to speak. Now that broke down. That broke down in the 19th century when Orthodox Jews in Austria and Germany spoke German. Some Sofer spoke German. They gave drushas in German. Hirsch wrote his books in German. So that was a departure. It was one of the things that the Eastern European Rabbonim could not understand. They had great respect for Shimshon Raphael Hirsch and for the Chacham Bernays and for all the great Rabbonim in Germany. But they could not understand how they're speaking German, how they're writing in German. Then naturally, when Jews came to England, so then the language became English. The older generation still spoke Yiddish amongst themselves, but the younger generation was English and the education was in English. And in France, it was in French. And then when they came to America, so again, the older generation was Yiddish. I remember my father's shul when I was a child, everyone spoke Yiddish, and my father's drushas were in Yiddish. But by the time I was bar mitzvah, my father was giving drushas in English, because that was now the language. And the language of American Jewry, Lakewood, even Borough Park, even Monroe, is still English. It's English with a Yiddish accent. It's a lot of Yiddish mixed in, but basically it's English. So in Mitzrayim, they never spoke Egyptian, Shaloshinu es Lashona. But it also says Shaloshinu es Shmoso. They didn't change their names. They didn't call themselves by Egyptian names. So the Ibn Ezra says here in a remarkable pshat that Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one that had an Egyptian name. Aaron, Hur, all the other names are all Hebrew names. Moshe is because she named him. Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, she said, Gimer Amayim Mishisihu. And Ibn Ezra says, Mishisihu is an Egyptian verb. It's not, the Mukar is not Hebrew. It came into the Hebrew language, but the origin of it is not Hebrew. So Moshe, that's not his Hebrew name. So Chazal say he had 7 names. They list the names: Avigdor, Yered, Yekusiel, Tuvia, all sorts of good Hebrew names. What makes a name a Hebrew name? In essence, it's a reference to either Torah or to the name of God. We are called Yisrael, Israel. Ki sarisa imalakim v'odom v'tucho. So we have all these names that end with Aleph Lamed or end with Yud Kei, or they have a Hey in it, they have a Yud in it, they have a Vov in it. Those are all Hebrew names. Moshe, it doesn't have any of that. It's a remarkable pshat of the Ibn Ezra, and I don't. The other Meforshim don't dwell on it. But one of the milas of Klal Yisrael, one of the attributes that they had in Egypt, is that they didn't change their names. So therefore, the Torah begins the description of the exile of Egypt by telling us their names, because these are the names they're going to have when they go out 300 years later, or 180 years later, whatever it is. These are going to be their names. And the Torah T'mima has a long essay on names. So he says every time you call your child, let's say you call him Yisrael, but you call him by his Jewish name, every time you call him, you remind him that he's Jewish. And therefore, he says that's the importance of names. Lately, in the last 50 years, in Israel, there are all sorts of names. Many of them are Hebrew, many are biblical, and many of them are different types of names. But throughout Jewish history, names have seeped into the Jewish people. For instance, the name Schneier is the Spanish name Señor. And when it came by the Ashkenazim, the S sound became an SH sound. Originally, it was Schneier, which is Señor, then it became Schneier. So now it's a famous Jewish name, Schneier. But the origin is Spanish. And the woman's name, Sprinze, Yiddish, we all think that's a Yiddish name. No Jewish girl wants to be named Sprinze today. But Sprinze is the Spanish name Esperanza, except it was corrupted when it entered into Yiddish society. There's a list of a few hundred names that are part of Yiddish names. Feivel. All sorts of names like that. They certainly aren't Jewish. They're German, they're who knows what they are. But they became part of Jewish society. And in becoming part of Jewish society, they became Jewish names. And therefore they have a certain memory attached to them. And people that have those names have that attachment to them. The Ramban also mentions here that Eilish Shmos B'nai Yisrael, that these were the names of their ancestors. That's also a buttress to the custom. The Ashkenazi name according to deceased ancestors, the Sephardim, who are less superstitious, name according to religious, the living ancestors. Because again, the name is the chain that binds the generations together. It reminds him. So if you call a child Avraham, so then he has an attachment to Avraham Avinu right away. No matter how distant he's going to be, he's going to know that Abraham. Lincoln once was asked, he was a very compassionate person, and he pardoned many soldiers. A soldier fell asleep on duty. So in the American Civil War, if you fell asleep on duty, they shot you. And he pardoned these soldiers. And they asked him why. And he said, I'm a child of my father Abraham. And name makes a difference. And so therefore Chazal emphasized all of that. And that's why the parsha begins with names, and the exile begins with the names, and the redemption will be with the names too. And we'll find it throughout the Chumash. Every time the Jewish people are counted, the names are said. What were their names? And those names remain thousands of years later as part of our heritage and culture and current events. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash, Omer Rotza Kodesh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Es Yisrael, V'ficha Chibur Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar, Adonai Chafetz L'man Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir, Rabbanan Kadosh.